Another game, another set of controversies, and another set of dumb opinions from journalists and idiots. Because these days, we can't just have a good game release without someone getting butthurt about it, can we? Look, I'll make you a deal. I'll get the dumb stuff out of the way and give you a proper review so we can enjoy the giant mech spectacle that is Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon. Back to FromSoft's roots, Armored Core 6 is a multi-branched, linear narrative told through dialogue and frenetically action-packed scenarios filled with enough bullets, beams, and explosions to make Michael Bay cry with jealousy. And two of those things have caused facepalm-inducing levels of cringe reviews from supposed industry professionals who don't have the basic skill sets to get past the tutorial boss, or pass the fairly cliched but serviceable science fantasy plotline, because Armored Core 6 is a reasonably difficult game. It's not the hardest thing in the world, but it is designed to provide a gameplay loop with incremental improvement and mech customization at its core. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's start at the beginning. The player is shot into the game both figuratively and literally from a giant railgun in the sky, where we are introduced as an amnesiac suffering modified human employed as some kind of indentured mercenary mech pilot who's trying to buy back their freedom. The graphics to this point and even later in the game aren't Unreal 5 levels of spectacular, but they're pretty enough, and more importantly, the art design is amazing. FromSoft's artists went for a clearly grounded and believable militaristic art style with hints of an anime flair thrown here and there, which gives the style a timeless aesthetic. This extends to the quality of sounds and textures that give every single weapon and every single mech's footsteps heft, weight, and impact. And it's that feeling FromSoft liberally used as the spice to flavor Armored Core 6's combat mechanics. Combat is a more deliberate affair than I originally expected, and clearly shows the influence that Elden Ring has had on this game, and it feels heavier and weightier than a traditional anime-style mech game. On the other hand, its speed and fluidity is faster and more prevalent than in the more tank-like MechWarrior games, which is supported by responsive controls and combat scenarios that require the player to move at high speeds in 3 dimensions against enemies of varied capabilities. And speaking of varied capabilities, enemies range from moving targets who only exist to waste your ammo in exchange for exploding metal and a level of mass destruction that puts the power in power fantasy, to giant armored vehicles, either grounded or in flight, that really show what FromSoft learned from everything that went into the making of Elden Ring, to even bigger moving structures that you have to approach in sections while avoiding instant and ever-explosive death, to face-offs against one or more well-equipped ACs requiring the player to use every bit of skill, experience, and collected parts to get past. The first boss at the end of the tutorial was a clear and hilarious fuck you to shoddy game journos, and was a great introduction to the gameplay loop, the enemy types, and combat mechanics. And the sense of incremental accomplishment and the real feeling that my skills were improving in real time was excellent, and made me want to play the game more, and enjoy combat more, and figure out exactly what combo of weapons and parts would give me the best advantage for victory. Where I got a taste of the secret sauce, the synthesis of the more deliberate style of combat refined through the Souls-like genre with the high speed, high energy, bullet raining insanity that is the mech genre. That was the moment where everything clicked for me, and the game really felt like a well thought out complete experience, where all the pieces fit together in a way that I was not expecting, and I didn't hate it. It was definitely a hard boss to fight, especially when I barely got into grips with the mechanics the game was teaching me, but I kept at it and kept improving while taking note of the boss's patterns and potential weak spots. and making better use of the environment around me to help me survive. And that feeling of satisfaction after finally demolishing it in fiery glory was immense. The exuberant feeling of cutting helicopters in half like an anime god protagonist and then fighting off against two enemy ACs like a titanium meteor of testosterone fueled lethality is so damn satisfying. And that carries through the entire game because the mechanics are on point. Combat is fluid, tactical, and oftentimes as much of a puzzle to solve as it is a test of one's skills. Scenarios and enemies are varied enough to keep you interested, and levels are large enough and have enough verticality to encourage high-paced movement in 3 dimensions while you fire off missiles at every enemy in the vicinity. And that's the vital core of any mech game. The mechanics have to be on point. The combat has to be challenging, high energy, and satisfying. The mech customization has to allow the player to solve whatever problems the game gives them, but also a way to express a broad range of playstyles. And the gameplay loop has to be consistent and engaging. And Armored Core 6 delivers on those requirements in spades. And its customization mechanics in particular have enough range and numbers everywhere to make any autistic mech fanatic happy, or anyone who likes to tinker with new combinations to see what kind of chaos I can create. Those numbers everywhere can be quite daunting for someone new to the genre or franchise, but the game does enough to give the player what they need to know, so they can choose to either dip their toes in the customization well, or dig deep under the hood and customize to their heart's content. And the player has access to even more ways to upgrade their mech and support playstyles with the OS upgrade system, which has a very real effect on the AC's performance in combat. The audio also works in the game's favor, with sound effects having an almost physical impact, making every weapon fired feels like it has weight. And that extends to when your ammunition hits your targets too, with missiles sounding as heavy and explosive as they look. And it's another layer to the flavor of the combat experience. Where the game falls somewhat short is its story, which is a serviceable science fantasy about the violence and political intrigues between rival factions on a world they don't live on, with an elemental MacGuffin material which is both the source of much of the plot's conflict, as well as a key resource needed by economies that aren't on the planet Rubicon. There's also a greater conflict between those factions and a faction who claims Rubicon as their own home, and another faction that may or may not be part of the MacGuffin itself. But I didn't get that far in my short time with the game to figure it out. The narrative is told to the player via mission briefing dialogues, arena challenge descriptions, and in-game radio chatter. The storytelling itself is okay, and the plot has me intrigued enough to not want to skip dialogues despite it not being the most original thing I've experienced. But I have heard that the game has 2 additional New Game Plus modes, which not only extend existing gameplay, but add new content in terms of challenges, story missions, and dialogue which flesh out the story further, and even lead to alternate endings. I am really looking forward to continuing my playthrough, not only for the fun gameplay, but to learn a bit more about the world we've been thrust into. The voice acting performances are fine, and while I hadn't made any real emotional attachment to the other characters, their personalities came through their performances quite clearly, and overall it didn't detract from the experience more than it added to it. I'm also really looking forward to getting into some multiplayer shenanigans, because there is nothing better than a boombastic, fantastic mecha power fantasy than a boombastic, fantastic mecha power fantasy with friends and even more. That may have been a bit excessive, but that's the name of the game when it comes to the mech genre, and the Armored Core franchise has never been an exception to that, and I hope it never does, because we could all use more video games that are actually video games that provide us with fun and engaging experiences, instead of platforms for failure, greed, and ideological grandstanding. It's time to settle up and summarize. Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon is a mech game that borrows quite a bit from the Souls-like genre, without making it feel like it's not a mech game. It provides a heavy metal power fantasy to the hilt, while also giving players enough of a challenge to test their skills, intelligence, and patience, while also not being as a higher barrier of difficulty as other Souls-likes. It has in-depth and detailed customization mechanics that the player can really feel when piloting the different ACs they build. It has a combat system that is not only tried and tested, but modified heavily to adopt three-dimensional movement and a much faster pace, while giving every action and bullet-fired weight heft to it, which I found to be particularly fitting for a giant combat robot. And it has enough content through its missions, extra new game plus modes, arena challenges, and multiplayer to keep you happily engaged and not bored. All in all, it's another game that's going to piss off the vast majority of those toxic AAA developers because it's worth your time and your money. So give it a go if you're a fan of mech games, Souls-likes, or just want something a bit different which is still a complete and not broken experience. And as always, my people, take care of yourselves.